Tonight, as you rest your head and allow your breath to slow, we will travel back in time. Imagine a world that existed more than 3,000 years ago. A world where great empires rose and fell, leaving behind only fragments, broken stones, and faint echoes in the records of their enemies. Our story begins in the heart of Anatolia, in what is now modern-day Turkey, where the Hittite Empire once stood as one of the most powerful civilizations of the ancient Near East. The Hittites are unusual in history because, despite their enormous power, they were almost forgotten. For centuries, their empire vanished from memory, as if erased. Unlike Egypt with its towering pyramids, or Mesopotamia with its enduring stories of Gilgamesh, the Hittites disappeared into silence. They left ruins buried beneath layers of earth, inscriptions written in languages few could understand, and faint mentions in the scriptures of their rivals. For a long time, scholars doubted they even existed. Yet they did. And tonight, in the calm of this story, we will bring them back to life. Close your eyes, if you wish, and picture the highlands of Anatolia. The land is rocky, with cold winters and short summers. The hills rise gently into mountains, and rivers cut through valleys. It is a place that feels distant, quiet, and hidden. In these lands, around 1600 BCE, the Hittites began to consolidate power. They were not the first people here. Before them came the Hattians, and then the Assyrians established trading colonies. But the Hittites, through ambition, warfare, and alliances, built something greater. They founded a kingdom that would eventually rival Egypt, Babylon, and Assyria. The capital of the Hittite Empire was Hattusa, a city carved into the rugged landscape. Imagine approaching its massive stone walls, stretching across the hills, with gates decorated by lions and sphinxes. The air is crisp, and the sound of hooves echoes as chariots move along stone roads. Hattusa was more than a city, it was the beating heart of an empire. From here, kings commanded armies, negotiated treaties, and issued laws that shaped the lives of thousands. The Hittites were masters of organization. They built a complex bureaucracy with scribes, officials, and governors who managed distant provinces. They spoke the Hittite language, an Indo-European tongue that makes them linguistic relatives of many peoples across Europe and Asia. Yet they were also influenced by the cultures around them. Their religion blended deities from Anatolia, Mesopotamia, and even Syria. They were a people of synthesis, bringing together ideas, gods, and traditions into a vast tapestry of belief and governance. As we drift deeper into their world, let us consider their power. The Hittites were among the first to master the use of iron. While their rivals relied mostly on bronze, the Hittites experimented with ironworking, giving them stronger weapons and tools. This advantage was subtle but significant, and it played a role in their military success. But perhaps their greatest weapon was the chariot. In battle, Hittite chariots thundered across the fields, carrying warriors armed with spears and bows. Fast, mobile, and terrifying, they could break enemy lines and decide the outcome of wars. Yet the Hittites were not only warriors, they were also diplomats. One of the most famous achievements of the Hittite Empire was the signing of what is considered the world's first known peace treaty. After years of conflict with the mighty Pharaoh Ramses II of Egypt, the Hittites and Egyptians agreed to peace. This treaty, inscribed on tablets, survives to this day, reminding us of their remarkable ability to negotiate and compromise even in an age of constant warfare. Still, For all their strength, the Hittites remain wrapped in mystery. Why did their empire fall? Why did their memory fade while others endured? Tonight, as we slowly journey through their story, we will explore not only their rise but also their disappearance. Like a candle that burned brightly and then vanished into darkness, the Hittites leave us with questions as much as answers. As you listen, let the rhythm of the words carry you. Picture the halls of Hattusa lit by torches, the sound of scribes scratching clay tablets, the prayers to storm gods whispered in temples high upon the hills. Picture the armies marching, the treaties being signed, the farmers working the rugged soil. This is not just a history. It is a dream of a civilization that once stood proudly in the ancient world. And so, our journey begins. The Hittites, an empire they do not want you to remember, are remembered once more. As the Hittite state grew, so too did its line of kings. The rulers of Hutti, as their kingdom was known, were both political leaders and religious figures. To be king of the Hittites was to stand at the center of an intricate web of duties: commander of armies, judge of disputes, protector of treaties, and mediator between the gods and the people. The Hittite king was often described as "my son," a symbol of radiance and divine authority. And yet, he was not an untouchable god-king like the pharaohs of Egypt. The Hittite king was human, expected to govern wisely, to listen to advisors, and to honor the will of the gods through rituals and sacrifices. One of the earliest and most significant kings was Hattusa I, who reigned in the 17th century BCE. His name means "the man from Hattusa," and it was he who firmly established the city as the royal capital. Under his leadership, the Hittites expanded beyond their central Anatolian base, pushing into northern Syria, where valuable trade routes connected Mesopotamia with the Mediterranean. These expansions were not always easy. They required wars, alliances, and careful balancing of competing local powers. Yet Hattusa laid the foundation for an empire that would endure for centuries. Hattusa was succeeded by his grandson, Mursili I, who carried Hittite power even further. In a daring campaign, Mursili led his armies deep into Mesopotamia, all the way to Babylon itself. Around 1595 BCE, Babylon fell to the Hittites. For a brief moment, the Hittites stood at the very center of the ancient world, victorious over one of the great cities of civilization. But this triumph was short-lived. The Hittites did not hold Babylon. Instead, they withdrew, leaving the city vulnerable to new powers, like the Kassites, who would dominate Mesopotamia for centuries. Still, the sack of Babylon announced the Hittites to history as a force to be reckoned with. After these early triumphs came challenges. Internal struggles, rival factions, and invasions weakened the kingdom. The Hittites retreated into their Anatolian heartland, where they survived in relative obscurity for several generations. Yet they did not disappear. Slowly, patiently, the Hittites rebuilt, gathering strength for what historians now call the Hittite New Kingdom, or Empire period, beginning in the 14th century BCE. During this period, the Hittites rose to their greatest heights under kings like Superpower I. Superpower was a brilliant general and statesman, a man whose campaigns reshaped the political map of the Near East. He conquered vast territories in Syria, defeating the once mighty Mitanni kingdom and bringing the Hittites into direct rivalry with Egypt. His reign marked the beginning of a golden era for the empire, where the Hittites became one of the great powers of what scholars call the Club of Nations, a group that included Egypt, Assyria, and Babylon. Suppiluliuma's story also reveals the human side of empire. At the height of his reign, he received an extraordinary message from Egypt. The young widow of Pharaoh Tutankhamun, known to history only as the Dakamunzu in Hittite records, sent word asking Suppiluliuma to send her one of his sons to marry her. If he agreed, his son would become Pharaoh of Egypt, and the two kingdoms would be united. It was an unprecedented opportunity, one that could have changed the balance of power forever. Suppiluliuma agreed and sent his son. But tragedy struck. The prince was murdered on his journey, most likely by rivals within Egypt. The opportunity was lost, and Suppiluliuma was left enraged, leading to further wars with Egypt. This tale of ambition, betrayal, and missed destiny captures the drama of the ancient world. It also reminds us of how fragile empires could be, dependent not only on armies and wealth but on the choices of individuals and the twists of fate. Under Suppiluliuma and his successors, the Hittites extended their control over a wide swath of territory. They ruled much of Anatolia, northern Syria, and beyond. Their empire stretched from the Aegean coast to the edges of Mesopotamia. In this vast domain lived peoples of many cultures, languages, and traditions. The Hittites governed through a combination of direct rule and vassal states. Kings and princes from subject territories swore loyalty to the great king of Hutti, often sealed with elaborate treaties. These treaties were not casual agreements. They were sacred covenants, sworn before the gods, and breaking them was considered both treason and blasphemy. The Hittite kings were also deeply religious. Their power rested on their ability to communicate with the divine. The storm god Tarhunt, the sun goddess of Arena, and countless other deities filled their pantheon. The Hittites believed their gods were everywhere, in the mountains, the rivers, the storms, and the fertile fields. Every year, the king and queen performed rituals and festivals to honor these gods, ensuring the prosperity of the land. The queen, often called the Tawanana, played a crucial role in these ceremonies, standing beside the king as a partner in both rule and religion. And yet, for all their grandeur, the Hittite rulers faced constant challenges. Their empire was surrounded by ambitious neighbors, Egypt to the south, Assyria to the east, Mycenaean Greeks to the west. Each threatened to undermine or invade. Within the empire, local lords sometimes rebelled, and the rugged terrain of Anatolia made communication and control difficult. The Hittite kings had to be not only warriors but also administrators and peacemakers. As you let your mind wander through these stories, imagine the halls of the royal palace in Hattusa. Picture stone walls decorated with reliefs of gods and kings. Picture clay tablets stacked high, recording treaties, laws, and letters. Picture the king seated on his throne, listening to envoys from Egypt, Babylon, or Assyria. The air is thick with incense, the voices low and deliberate, the weight of empire pressing on every word. The Hittites remind us that history is not only about monuments and battles. It is about people, their ambitions, their fears, their triumphs, and their losses. In their kings, we see reflections of the eternal struggle for power, the delicate balance between strength and vulnerability. And as we continue our journey, we will see how this balance would one day tip, leading to both glory and collapse. For now, rest with the knowledge that the Hittites were once among the greatest rulers of the ancient world. Their kings stood alongside pharaohs and emperors, shaping the destiny of nations. Though time has buried their memory, tonight we bring them into the light again, one story at a time. When we speak of great empires, our minds often turn to rulers and wars, to treaties carved into stone and victories sung by poets. But the true heart of a civilization is not found only in its kings and generals. It is found in the daily rhythms of life, in the ways ordinary people ate, worked, prayed, and dreamed. Tonight, we turn our gaze away from the throne and into the streets of the Hittite Empire to discover what it was like to live under the watchful eyes of the great king of Hutti. The empire's capital, Hattusa, stood as a city of contrasts. At its center were monumental walls, colossal gates adorned with lions, and palaces where kings and queens performed rituals before the gods. Yet surrounding this grandeur were neighborhoods of ordinary homes, made of mud, brick, and stone, their flat roofs used for storage or for sleeping on warm summer nights. Within these homes, families lived lives of labor and devotion, raising children, tending fires, and working the land. The economy of the Hittites rested first on agriculture. The rugged Anatolian plateau was not an easy land, but through perseverance it yielded barley, wheat, and emmer. Fields of grain rippled in the wind, tended by farmers who prayed for the rains to come in their season. In small gardens, lentils, chickpeas, onions, and garlic grew. Livestock roamed the hills, sheep for wool, goats for milk, cattle for plowing, and pigs for meat. Horses were treasured, for they were not simply beasts of burden but instruments of war, trained for the swift chariots that thundered across battlefields. Hunting, too, filled tables and hearts. The forests and plains of Anatolia offered deer, boar, and even lions. A successful hunt was more than food, it was a bond with the land, a sign of favor from the gods. Trade connected the Hittites to the wider world. From the south came cedar wood and precious stones, from Mesopotamia fine textiles and oils, from the Aegean metals and crafted goods. Caravans loaded with goods wound their way across mountains and valleys, accompanied by merchants and guards. At night they rested in way stations where stories flowed with wine, and news of distant lands reached ears eager for tales. Hittite merchants were both practical and adventurous, for every journey carried risk, bandits, storms, and the endless challenge of rugged terrain. Religion touched every layer of life. The Hittites believed the world was filled with divine presence. The storm god Tarhunt brought rain and thunder. The sun goddess of Arena shone light on the fields. Countless mountain and river gods guarded the land. In every home, small offerings were made, bread, beer, or a sacrificed animal. Festivals filled the year, marking planting and harvest, victories and peace. During these celebrations, music filled the air, flutes, lyres, drums beating rhythms that echoed across valleys. Dancers twirled, priests chanted, and the people gave thanks for survival and abundance. The king and queen themselves led great rituals, believing that the prosperity of the land depended on their devotion. The Hittites were also a people of law. Their legal code, inscribed on clay tablets, reveals a society deeply concerned with fairness. Unlike the rigid and often brutal code of Hammurabi, Hittite law leaned toward restitution. If one man injured another, he often paid silver rather than facing mutilation. If animals were stolen, they were returned with compensation. Death was reserved for treason, sorcery, or grave rebellion. These laws suggest a culture that valued balance and community harmony, recognizing that punishment should heal as well as deter. Women in the Hittite Empire held roles of unusual importance. The queen, called the Tawananna, was not only the king's wife but also his partner in religious duties, often retaining authority even after her husband's death. Beyond the palace, women could own property, sign contracts, and manage households. They were central to weaving, food production, and even cult practices. Marriage was generally arranged, yet divorce was permitted, and women retained control over their dowries. In many ancient cultures, women were almost invisible in law and record, but among the Hittites their presence is firmly imprinted in the clay of history. Slavery existed, but it too bore unique characteristics. Many slaves were captives from war, brought into the households of their conquerors. Yet Hittite law protected them from excessive abuse. They could marry, own property, and even buy freedom. Slaves were part of the household, bound by duty yet not wholly stripped of dignity. This does not erase the hardship they endured, but it does reveal a system more flexible than many others of its time. At the heart of the empire's administration were scribes. In cities like Hattusa, scribal schools trained young men in the art of cuneiform, teaching them to inscribe symbols into clay tablets. These scribes were essential. They recorded treaties with Egypt, letters to Assyria, inventories of grain, hymns to the gods, and legal disputes between farmers. Through them, we glimpse both the bureaucracy and the humanity of the empire. Their tablets preserve myths like the Song of Komarbi, where gods rise and fall in violent succession, themes that echo later in Greek myths of Kronos and Zeus. The Hittites were transmitters of stories, keeping alive the shared imagination of the ancient Near East. Picture an evening in Hattusa. The sun has set behind the Anatolian hills, leaving the city in a glow of torchlight. In small courtyards, families gather around meals of bread, cheese, stew, and beer. Children listen to elders recount tales of distant lands or legends of storm gods. In a nearby street, music drifts from a festival rehearsal, where drums set the pace for dancers. In the palace, priests prepare offerings, and scribes press reeds into clay, preserving decisions made that day. Beyond the city walls, shepherds guard their flocks, and soldiers prepare for journeys yet to come. Life moves slowly, rhythmically, tied to the turning of seasons and the will of the gods. What is most striking about the Hittites is how connected they were to those around them. They absorbed gods from Hurrians, myths from Mesopotamians, and techniques from Egyptians. They were not isolated but open, building a culture that was at once unique and shared. Their empire was not just a military power but a meeting place, where cultures mingled, exchanged, and transformed. As we linger in this vision, the sounds of the Hittite world grow softer. The marketplace quiets, the scribes extinguish their lamps, and the city of Hattusa drifts into slumber. Families dream of harvests, soldiers dream of victory, and priests dream of visions from the gods. It is in these dreams, in the quiet lives of countless forgotten people, that the true spirit of the Hittite Empire resides. Though time has buried their walls and their names, tonight we let them breathe again. The Hittites were not only kings and battles. They were mothers and children, scribes and farmers, dancers and dreamers. And in their lives, we find the essence of humanity itself, enduring, fragile, and unforgettable, even when forgotten. To understand the Hittite Empire fully, we must turn our attention to the element that often defined their power: war. The Hittites were not merely administrators, traders, or builders. They were formidable warriors whose strategies, weapons, and innovations allowed them to dominate Anatolia and challenge neighboring empires. And yet, their approach to warfare was as much about diplomacy and strategy as it was about brute force. From the earliest days, the Hittites recognized the value of organization and discipline in battle. Their armies were composed of infantry, archers, and the famed chariots that would become legendary across the ancient Near East. Unlike foot soldiers alone, Hittite chariots carried a small team, often a driver and an archer, moving swiftly across the battlefield to strike at key positions. These vehicles, lightweight but sturdy, were equipped with spoked wheels and reinforced axles, technological innovations that gave the Hittites a tactical edge. Chariot warfare was not simple. It required rigorous training, coordination, and knowledge of terrain. Drivers had to maintain speed while keeping formation. Archers had to shoot with precision even as the chariot jolted over rough ground. The Hittites excelled at this, and their enemies often underestimated the impact of these mobile units until it was too late. The thunder of chariot wheels, the flight of arrows, and the discipline of the infantry created a force that could break enemy lines with frightening efficiency. Yet technology alone did not make the Hittites powerful. They understood the value of intelligence, alliances, and psychological warfare. Before campaigns, scouts were sent to gather information about terrain, fortifications, and enemy positions. Spies and informants sometimes traveled ahead of armies to sow confusion or gather critical data. Diplomacy was used alongside warfare. Marriages, treaties, and vassal arrangements often prevented conflicts or allowed for strategic advantage. The Hittites were not reckless conquerors. They were patient, calculating, and pragmatic. One of the most famous military leaders of the Hittites was Superpower I, whose campaigns transformed the empire in the 14th century BCE. Under his command, the Hittite armies defeated the Mitanni kingdom, securing the rich lands of northern Syria. Superpower also engaged in conflicts with Egypt, culminating in what historians describe as one of the most significant encounters of the Late Bronze Age. While the Hittites never permanently occupied Egyptian territory, they demonstrated their strength through skirmishes, sieges, and strategic positioning, proving that Anatolia's might could challenge even the land of the pharaohs. Fortifications played an equally important role. Cities like Hattusa were heavily defended, with massive stone walls, gates adorned with lions, and towers designed to provide vantage points for archers. These defenses were not merely for show, they were critical in a region of constant warfare. Even small settlements had protective walls, and border fortresses allowed the Hittites to monitor movement, control trade routes, and secure vital resources. In times of invasion, these fortifications could mean the difference between survival and destruction. The Hittites also innovated in the realm of weaponry. While bronze was still the dominant material of the time, the Hittites are among the first cultures known to experiment with iron. Early iron weapons, though rare and precious, gave their armies a potential advantage, as iron proved stronger and more durable than bronze in certain applications. Swords, spearheads, and arrowheads crafted from iron were coveted, and the knowledge of ironworking gave the Hittites an edge that would influence future civilizations. Campaigns were often long and arduous. Soldiers marched for days across rough terrain, carrying weapons, rations, and supplies. Logistics were carefully managed. Food had to be transported, water sources identified, and horses fed and rested. The Hittite military command maintained detailed records of provisions, troop movements, and engagements. Orders were written on clay tablets, ensuring clarity and accountability. Discipline was strict, but soldiers were motivated not only by duty to the king but also by the promise of loot, land, and status upon victory. Sieges were common in Hittite warfare, requiring ingenuity and perseverance. Armies constructed ramps, ladders, and battering equipment to breach city walls. Archers and slingers provided covering fire, while infantry prepared to storm gates. Success often depended on patience. A prolonged siege could starve defenders, erode morale, and force surrender without a single life lost in direct combat. Hittite commanders understood that war was as much about strategy as it was about courage and strength. Naval engagements, while less common, also occurred along the Mediterranean coast. Hittite ships, though not as advanced as those of the Phoenicians or Egyptians, transported troops and supplies, allowing for amphibious operations. Coastal forts and harbor defenses supplemented these operations, ensuring that the Hittites maintained influence over maritime trade routes. Their reach was not limited to land. The empire's power extended wherever they could project it, blending diplomacy, strategy, and force. Yet for all their strength, the Hittites knew that empire could not be sustained by war alone. Treaties and alliances were essential. Perhaps the most famous example is the Treaty of Kadesh, negotiated after battles with Egypt. This treaty, inscribed on clay and stone, outlined boundaries, mutual obligations, and a pledge for peace. It is considered one of the earliest known examples of a formal peace agreement in history. The Hittites recognized that diplomacy could secure what armies alone could not, and that maintaining alliances with vassal states was as crucial as victory on the battlefield. Military life also shaped the culture of the Hittites. Warrior values, discipline, courage, loyalty, permeated society, influencing art, literature, and ritual. Songs of victory were composed and performed during festivals. Statues and reliefs depicted chariots, helmets, and spears, reminding citizens of the power and prestige of the army. Young men trained from an early age in archery, horsemanship, and tactics, preparing to serve the king and defend the land. Military prowess was a source of pride, not only for the soldiers but for all citizens who shared in the empire's glory. And yet, war was also costly. Every campaign demanded resources, manpower, and careful planning. Defeats were felt deeply, not only by armies but by the civilian population. Crops could be destroyed, villages pillaged, and trade disrupted. The Hittite leaders understood that war was a delicate balance. Too little, and enemies might grow bold. Too much, and the empire could overextend, risking collapse. This awareness of the fragility of power is a recurring theme in the story of the Hittites, reminding us that empires, no matter how mighty, always walk a narrow path between triumph and disaster. As night falls in our imagined Hittite world, imagine soldiers returning to Hattusa from the training grounds, boots dusty from long marches, armor clinking softly. In the streets, citizens gather around fires, sharing stories of past campaigns or rumors of new conflicts. The scent of cooked barley and roasted meat drifts from homes, mingling with the faint smoke of torches. To understand the Hittites completely, we must turn our gaze from kings, soldiers, and cities, and enter the realm of the gods. Religion was not a distant abstraction in Hittite society. It was woven into every aspect of life. The Hittites believed that their world was alive with divine presence. Every mountain, river, storm, and fertile field was inhabited or influenced by a god or goddess. To them, the earth was sacred, and every action carried spiritual weight. The pantheon of the Hittites was vast and intricate. At its center stood the storm god Tar-Hunt, a powerful deity associated with thunder, rain, and fertility. Tar-Hunt was often depicted wielding a lightning bolt, riding across the heavens to ensure the growth of crops and the protection of the people. The sun goddess of Arena, another central figure, represented light, warmth, and life-giving energy. Her presence was essential for the success of both agriculture and governance, and she was honored with rituals led by the king and queen. But the Hittites did not stop there. Their religion absorbed deities from neighboring cultures, the Hurrians, Mesopotamians, and even the Canaanites. This syncretism created a rich tapestry of belief, where gods of storm, sun, moon, fertility, war, and protection coexisted. Each city might emphasize certain deities over others, and local gods were often incorporated into state ceremonies. This flexibility allowed the Hittites to govern a diverse empire, respecting the beliefs of conquered peoples while maintaining central authority. Temples were the heart of religious life. In Hattusa, massive structures rose upon hilltops, constructed from stone and adorned with reliefs of gods and mythical creatures. Priests and priestesses performed daily rituals, making offerings of grain, wine, beer, and animals. Sacred fires burned continuously, symbolizing the eternal presence of the divine. Festivals marked the calendar, celebrating planting, harvest, victory in battle, and royal anniversaries. During these occasions, music, dance, and poetry intertwined with prayer, creating communal experiences that united citizens under shared devotion. The king himself played a critical role in religion. He was seen as the mediator between the gods and the people, a living link whose duties extended beyond governance into spiritual guardianship. The queen, known as the Tawanana, assisted in these rituals and often retained her ceremonial role even after the king's death. Together, they ensured the favor of the gods, believed essential for the stability and prosperity of the empire. Divination and omens were also central to Hittite practice. Priests interpreted the flight of birds, the entrails of sacrificed animals, and the movements of celestial bodies. Dreams were recorded and analyzed for guidance. Decisions, from battles to marriages, were often influenced by these interpretations, revealing a society deeply attuned to signs and symbols. The Hittites believed that ignoring omens could bring disaster, whether in the form of failed crops, military defeat, or internal strife. Mythology flourished alongside ritual. Stories such as the Song of Kumarbi preserved narratives of gods who struggled, fell, and rose again, mirroring the unpredictability of human existence. These myths were more than entertainment. They were moral guides, cautionary tales, and cultural memory. They linked the people to the cosmic order, explaining natural events and human behavior through the lens of divine action. Death and the afterlife were approached with solemnity. Tombs and burial practices varied depending on status, wealth, and local customs. Kings and high officials were often buried with goods, weapons, and inscriptions intended to honor them and provide for their journey beyond life. Commoners might be interred with simple offerings, but the belief in a continued existence ensured that even ordinary lives were framed within a spiritual context. Funerary rituals were meticulously observed, connecting families to ancestors and preserving memory through generations. Magic and ritual healing were also important. Amulets, incantations, and protective spells were used to ward off illness, misfortune, and malevolent spirits. Sorcery was feared and regulated by law, but beneficial ritual practices were commonplace. Every household might possess small charms, and visits to temple healers were frequent when misfortune struck. The boundary between religion, medicine, and magic was fluid, reflecting the Hittite understanding of the world as infused with unseen forces. Art and architecture echoed religious beliefs. Reliefs depicted gods riding chariots, wielding thunderbolts, or holding symbols of fertility. Temples were oriented to capture sunlight or align with natural landmarks, enhancing the sacred atmosphere. Even everyday objects, from pottery to jewelry, often carried religious symbols, subtly reminding citizens of the divine presence in every facet of life. As night falls over our imagined Hittite city, imagine the soft glow of fires in the temples. Priests chant in low tones, while offerings of grain, wine, and animals are placed upon altars. The king reviews ritual calendars, ensuring the god's favor will be secured for the coming season. Citizens pause in their daily routines to acknowledge deities, whispering small prayers as they move through markets, fields, and homes. Children grow up surrounded by these rituals, internalizing a worldview where the divine shapes every moment. Religion was not separate from governance, war, or daily life. It was the thread connecting all aspects of Hittite society. The Hittites understood that power rested not only in armies and treaties, but also in spiritual harmony. By honoring gods, observing omens, and participating in ritual, the empire reinforced its stability, culture, and identity. And so, in the quiet of this imagined night, let your mind rest among the temples, altars, and sacred fires of Hattusa. Hear the chants echo through stone corridors, see the shadows of priests moving in flickering torchlight, and feel the weight of devotion that shaped an empire. The Hittites, a people long forgotten, were alive in their gods, their myths, and the spiritual heartbeat of every citizen. In remembering them tonight, we honor not only their power and ingenuity, but the world they believed was alive with the unseen forces that guided all life. Beyond kings, armies, and religion, the Hittites left a mark on the world through their culture, art, and architecture. Their achievements in these fields reveal not only the practical needs of an empire, but also a deep appreciation for beauty, symbolism, and expression. As we explore Hittite life tonight, imagine the cities, temples, and works of art that filled their landscapes, telling stories of a civilization both powerful and imaginative. Hattusa, the capital, was more than a political center. It was a canvas for Hittite creativity. The city was carefully planned, with streets winding between temples, palaces, and administrative buildings. Massive gates, such as the Lion Gate and the King's Gate, were adorned with stone reliefs depicting lions, dragons, and mythological creatures. These images were not merely decorative, they were protective symbols, intended to ward off evil and convey the power of the king. Every detail, from the carved stones to the city walls, reflected a careful blending of functionality and symbolism. Temples and religious buildings were among the most impressive architectural achievements. Constructed from stone and mud brick, they often stood on elevated platforms, emphasizing their importance and visibility. Courtyards allowed for communal gatherings and rituals, while inner sanctuaries housed statues and altars. Columns, carvings, and symbolic motifs filled these spaces, connecting the earthly and divine. Sacred fires burned continuously in some temples, casting flickering shadows that brought the walls and reliefs to life. creating a sense of awe for all who entered. Art in Hittite society served multiple purposes: religious, political, and decorative. Reliefs depicted gods, kings, and mythological beings, often emphasizing movement, power, and narrative. Chariots charged across stone panels, warriors clashed with enemies, storm gods hurled lightning bolts from the sky. Even smaller objects, pottery, jewelry, seals, were adorned with symbols of protection, fertility, or divine favor. These artistic expressions were not isolated. They reflected the values, beliefs, and aspirations of a people deeply attuned to their world. Sculpture was another medium through which the Hittites communicated. Statues of deities, animals, and royal figures were carved from stone or cast in bronze. These figures were placed in temples, tombs, or public spaces, serving as constant reminders of divine presence, authority, and cultural ideals. The Hittites valued not only form but symbolism. Every detail carried meaning, from the posture of a god to the tools held by a worker. Even the smallest figurines could convey stories, prayers, or protective qualities. Writing and literacy were closely tied to art and culture. The Hittites adopted cuneiform from Mesopotamia but adapted it to their own language, creating tablets that recorded treaties, laws, rituals, and myths. Scribes were artists in their own right, their inscriptions carefully arranged to communicate clearly and elegantly. Some tablets were decorative as well as functional, with elaborate borders, divine symbols, or illustrations accompanying the text. These records ensured that both the practical and spiritual life of the empire was preserved for future generations. Music and performance also played a role in Hittite culture. Lyres, flutes, drums, and percussion instruments accompanied festivals, rituals, and celebrations. Music reinforced communal identity, marking seasons, victories, and religious observances. Dancing, often performed in synchrony with musical rhythms, added another layer of expression. Through these performances, citizens of all ages participated in cultural life, connecting with one another and the divine. Craftsmanship extended to everyday objects as well. Pottery was not only utilitarian but also aesthetic, decorated with patterns, symbols, and sometimes pictorial narratives. Metalwork, including tools, weapons, and jewelry, demonstrated skill, precision, and artistic vision. Weaving produced textiles that were both practical and beautiful, with patterns reflecting status, region, and cultural influences. Every object, large or small, was an intersection of art and function, reflecting a worldview where beauty and utility were inseparable. Hittite architecture also incorporated natural landscapes into design. Temples and palaces were oriented toward hills, rivers, or celestial events. Certain structures aligned with solstices or specific astronomical phenomena, linking daily life with cosmic rhythms. The use of stone reliefs, carved motifs, and symbolic patterns transformed functional spaces into living narratives, reminding all who entered that the empire was both earthly and sacred. Education, too, was part of cultural life. Young scribes trained for years, learning not only cuneiform but also mathematics, astronomy, and religious knowledge. They copied myths, legal codes, and ritual texts, preserving knowledge while cultivating precision and discipline. These scribes were essential to the continuity of culture, bridging generations through written records. Even the Hittite diet reflected cultural values. Meals included bread, grains, legumes, vegetables, and occasionally meat. Beer and wine were common, used both in daily life and in ritual contexts. Dining was not only sustenance but also a social and sometimes ceremonial experience, reinforcing communal bonds. Recipes, preparation methods, and serving practices were transmitted across generations, creating continuity in daily life alongside the grandeur of empire. Craft, art, and architecture were inseparable from religion, law, and governance. Reliefs told stories of kings and gods. Temples served both spiritual and civic functions. Objects carried symbols of protection or status. In every carved stone, painted pot, or woven textile, the Hittites expressed their identity, values, and vision of the world. As night descends, imagine the city of Hattusa once more. Torchlight flickers across stone reliefs of lions and dragons. Music echoes from courtyards where dancers move in rhythm with drums. Scribes work in dim rooms, inscribing tablets that preserve law, myth, and history. Citizens rest in their homes, children listening to tales of gods, kings, and heroes. The air carries the mingled scents of food, incense, and the earth itself. The empire sleeps, yet every wall, every object, every story is alive with the presence of Hittite culture. In reflecting on their art and architecture, we see the Hittites as more than conquerors. They were creators, storytellers, and preservers of knowledge. Their world, though distant, resonates with beauty, meaning, and continuity. Even in silence, their legacy speaks, through stone, clay, music, and ritual, reminding us of a civilization that understood the profound connection between daily life, belief, and creative expression. While kings, armies, and religion defined much of the Hittite Empire's internal life, their relationships with neighboring powers were equally vital. Diplomacy was a cornerstone of Hittite strategy, and the empire's influence stretched far beyond the Anatolian plateau through careful negotiation, strategic marriages, and formal treaties. To understand the Hittites fully, one must explore the subtle art of their international relations, where words often carried as much weight as swords. The Hittites interacted with the great powers of the Late Bronze Age, including Egypt, Assyria, Mitanni, and Babylon. Each kingdom had its ambitions, and the Hittites learned early that alliances could be as decisive as battles. Marriage diplomacy was a frequent tool. Kings often offered daughters to foreign rulers, or received foreign princesses into the Hittite court. Such unions were more than personal arrangements. They cemented alliances, secured loyalty, and created networks of mutual obligation that could stabilize borders or secure strategic advantages. Treaties were another critical instrument. The Hittites were meticulous in their agreements, often inscribing them on clay tablets in cuneiform and placing them in temples to ensure divine witness. One of the most famous examples is the Treaty of Kadesh with Egypt, negotiated after a lengthy series of conflicts and campaigns. This treaty established boundaries, outlined mutual defense, and created mechanisms for cooperation, demonstrating that diplomacy could achieve what armies alone might struggle to enforce. Treaties were binding not only politically but spiritually. Breaking a treaty was considered both treason and blasphemy, inviting misfortune from the gods. Correspondence was essential in maintaining these relationships. The Hittites wrote letters to kings, envoys, and vassal rulers, discussing trade, military movements, and ceremonial obligations. These letters reveal a sophisticated understanding of protocol, hierarchy, and negotiation. They were often polite yet firm, blending respect with subtle pressure, and were carefully copied by scribes to preserve accuracy. Through this written diplomacy, the Hittites maintained influence over distant territories, reinforcing the perception of a powerful and organized state. The Hittites were also skilled at managing vassal states. Territories in northern Syria, the Levant, and beyond were governed by local rulers who pledged loyalty to Hattusa. These rulers paid tribute, provided troops when required, and adhered to laws prescribed by the Hittite court. In return, they received protection, legitimacy, and inclusion in ceremonial life. This system allowed the Hittites to extend their reach without overextending their resources, balancing control with autonomy. Conflict and diplomacy were often intertwined. Campaigns were launched not merely for conquest but to enforce treaties, secure borders, or respond to provocations. Victory in battle could enhance bargaining power, while defeat required careful negotiation to maintain honor and influence. Hittite leaders understood that every action on the battlefield had diplomatic consequences, and every treaty had strategic implications. They were both warriors and statesmen, navigating a world where alliances shifted, and fortunes could change with a single letter or battle. Egypt, in particular, played a central role in Hittite foreign policy. Relations with the pharaohs oscillated between war and alliance. The famous correspondence between Suppiluliuma I and the Egyptian widow, referred to in Hittite records as the Dakamunzu, illustrates the blend of personal, political, and diplomatic considerations. When the Egyptian queen requested a Hittite prince to marry her, it was an unprecedented opportunity for alliance, but it ended in tragedy with the prince's death, demonstrating how fragile diplomacy could be and how closely personal decisions could shape international outcomes. Trade was another facet of diplomacy. Hittite merchants traveled to neighboring lands, exchanging goods such as grain, silver, timber, and crafted items for foreign luxuries and raw materials. These exchanges were carefully monitored, often accompanied by official permits or agreements. Trade reinforced political ties, spreading cultural influence and fostering mutual dependency. A merchant caravan could carry not only goods but also news, ideas, and cultural practices, making commerce a subtle form of soft power. Communication was central to maintaining the empire's international presence. Couriers traveled across mountains, deserts, and plains, ensuring that messages reached distant kings and governors. Scribes documented agreements, military plans, and ceremonial protocols. Envoys represented the Hittite king in foreign courts, carefully observing etiquette and maintaining the empire's dignity. Diplomacy required patience, skill, and attentiveness, for a misstep could lead to war, rebellion, or the loss of strategic advantage. Religious observance also underpinned diplomacy. Treaties were sworn before gods, ensuring that agreements carried both political and divine weight. Invocations, rituals, and offerings accompanied negotiations, signaling sincerity and respect. This blending of political and spiritual authority reinforced the seriousness of treaties and created a shared understanding of obligations across cultures. The Hittites also practiced intelligence gathering as part of diplomacy. Spies and scouts provided information about potential threats, political instability, and military preparations in neighboring kingdoms. Knowledge was power, and accurate information allowed the Hittites to negotiate from strength, avoid unnecessary conflict, and exploit opportunities when rivals were weakened. Through these combined strategies, marriage alliances, treaties, trade, diplomacy, intelligence, and religion, the Hittites managed to navigate a complex international landscape. They maintained influence over distant territories, competed with major powers, and safeguarded the interests of their empire. Their success was not only measured in the expansion of borders but in the stability of their relationships and the resilience of their diplomatic networks. As night falls over the imagined world of the Hittites, picture the couriers setting off on long journeys, letters sealed with clay traveling between courts. Envoys arrive at foreign palaces, bowing before kings, exchanging gifts, and negotiating terms. In Hattusa, scribes record the outcomes of these interactions, while the king contemplates the delicate balance of alliances and rivalries. The empire sleeps, but its reach extends far, a web of agreements, relationships, and obligations that secures its power without a single sword being drawn. The Hittites remind us that empire is not only built on conquest. It is also built on the subtle art of negotiation, the patience to wait, and the wisdom to understand that words can be as powerful as armies. Diplomacy was the lifeblood of the Hittite state, sustaining its people, protecting its borders, and ensuring that the voice of Hutti resonated across the ancient world. Tonight, we turn our focus once more to the heart of the Hittite world, the lives of ordinary people. While kings, warriors, and priests shaped history, the daily rhythms of farmers, artisans, merchants, and families defined the empire's soul. Life in Hutti was a balance of labor, ritual, social obligation, and quiet personal moments. To understand the Hittites, we must imagine their streets, homes, and hearths. Hattusa and other cities were centers of activity, where neighborhoods clustered around narrow streets and courtyards. Houses were typically made of mud brick with flat roofs that served as additional living or working spaces. Inside, families gathered around the hearth, preparing meals of bread, legumes, vegetables, and occasionally meat. Cooking involved grinding grain into flour, baking bread in simple ovens, and brewing beer, a staple of daily life. Every meal was a rhythm of care, sustenance, and community. Children played in the streets and courtyards, learning early about responsibility, social norms, and practical skills. They assisted in chores, tended small gardens, and observed the work of their parents. Education was informal for most, though scribal training offered a formal path for those destined for administrative, religious, or diplomatic roles. Storytelling and songs passed down knowledge, values, and cultural memory, while lessons in weaving, farming, or craft ensured that each generation was equipped to survive and contribute. The family structure emphasized mutual responsibility and respect. Parents guided children, and elders held authority while remaining integral to household operations. Extended families often lived close together, sharing labor, resources, and wisdom. Women played crucial roles in household management, weaving, food preparation, and religious observances, while men worked fields, herded livestock, crafted tools, or served in military campaigns. Families were the foundation of Hittite society, providing stability and continuity across generations. Agriculture dominated daily life for most citizens. Fields of barley, wheat, and emmer required constant attention, from plowing and sowing to weeding and harvesting. Irrigation, terracing, and careful observation of seasonal cycles ensured that crops thrived in Anatolia's challenging terrain. Livestock, sheep, goats, cattle, and horses, required feeding, herding, and care. Horses, in particular, held special importance for both status and military readiness, and their training was an ongoing task that combined skill, patience, and understanding of the animal's behavior. Crafts and trade supplemented the agrarian economy. Artisans produced pottery, textiles, metalwork, and tools. Pottery was both functional and decorative, featuring patterns and symbols that carried cultural meaning. Metalworkers crafted weapons, household items, and ornaments, often with intricate designs. Textiles were woven on looms, dyed with natural colors, and used for clothing, bedding, or ceremonial purposes. Markets were vibrant spaces where merchants exchanged goods, news, and stories, reinforcing community bonds and spreading influence. Religion and ritual permeated daily life. Every home maintained small shrines, with clay figurines or symbolic objects representing protective deities. Offerings of bread, beer, or small animals were made to ensure health, prosperity, and divine favor. Festivals punctuated the year, celebrating planting, harvest, royal anniversaries, and military victories. During these celebrations, music, dance, and ceremonial performances unified communities, reminding citizens of their connection to the gods and to each other. The legal system structured social interactions. Hittite laws were preserved on clay tablets, providing insight into property rights, family matters, and conflict resolution. Unlike harsher codes elsewhere, Hittite law often emphasized restitution rather than corporal punishment. Theft, injury, or dispute might be resolved through compensation, reflecting a society concerned with maintaining harmony and balance. Even slaves had rights under the law, permitted to marry, own property, or buy freedom. Such protections demonstrate a nuanced understanding of justice and social cohesion. Marriage, family life, and gender roles were similarly structured by law and custom. Marriages were often arranged, connecting families and consolidating social or economic ties. Women retained rights over dowries and possessions, could initiate divorce under certain conditions, and participated in religious and ceremonial duties. Men generally assumed responsibility for external affairs, farming, trade, military service, while also participating in religious observances. Children learned from both parents, gaining practical skills, social knowledge, and a sense of duty. Health, hygiene, and medical practices were part of daily concern. Herbal remedies, ritual healing, and practical care were used to treat illness. Temples often served as centers for medical knowledge, where priests combined religious observance with practical treatment. Clean water, proper storage of food, and attention to sanitation were understood to be critical, even if framed within religious and ritual contexts. Illness was seen as both physical and spiritual, requiring holistic attention. Leisure and culture were woven into the rhythm of life. Music, storytelling, games, and crafts provided entertainment and education. Festivals allowed citizens to step beyond daily work, celebrating community, fertility, and divine favor. Public gatherings reinforced social cohesion, and citizens of all ages participated in communal events, learning traditions, songs, and dances that would be passed to future generations. As dusk settles, imagine the soft glow of fires in Hittite homes. Parents prepare simple meals, children listen to tales of gods and heroes, and neighbors exchange news across courtyards. Craftsmen finish their work, merchants close their stalls, and priests light small lamps in home shrines. The city is calm yet alive, a network of interconnected lives, each contributing to the continuity and vitality of the empire. Daily life in the Hittite Empire was a delicate balance of labor, faith, law, and leisure. It was ordinary in its routines, yet extraordinary in its resilience and cultural richness. Through these daily rhythms, the Hittites maintained their society, nurtured their children, honored their gods, and preserved the traditions that allowed an empire to endure for centuries. And as we let our minds rest among the streets, homes, and hearts of Hattusa, we see not only a society of kings and warriors but a people whose lives, though long ago, still speak to the timeless human experience. The Hittite Empire was not sustained by warfare and politics alone. Its prosperity depended equally on the careful management of resources, trade networks, and economic systems. Understanding how the Hittites fed, clothed, and equipped their people offers a window into daily life and the mechanisms that enabled their power to endure. Agriculture formed the backbone of the Hittite economy. Farmers worked the rugged Anatolian plateau, cultivating barley, wheat, and emmer. They managed irrigation channels, terraces, and crop rotations to maximize yields in a challenging landscape. Seasonal cycles dictated their labor, plowing in the spring, planting and tending during summer, harvesting in autumn, and storing grain for winter. Each step required skill, patience, and a profound understanding of the land's rhythms. Livestock, sheep, goats, cattle, and horses complemented agriculture. These animals provided meat, milk, wool, hides, and transportation, contributing to both domestic sustenance and trade. Forestry and natural resources were carefully utilized. Timber from Anatolian forests was essential for construction, shipbuilding, and chariot production. Metal ores, including copper, tin, and iron, were mined and smelted to produce weapons, tools, and ceremonial objects. Salt, precious stones, and other minerals were gathered, processed, and often exchanged through long-distance trade networks. The Hittites understood the importance of resource management, ensuring sustainability to maintain the empire's strength. Trade connected the Hittite world to distant regions. Caravans transported goods across mountains, plains, and rivers, linking Anatolia with Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Levant, and the Aegean. Hittite merchants traded grain, livestock, textiles, metalwork, and crafted items for timber, copper, silver, and luxury goods. Trade was both a practical necessity and a source of cultural exchange. Through commerce, ideas, technologies, and beliefs traveled alongside goods, enriching Hittite culture and expanding its influence. Markets within cities served as vibrant centers of economic activity. Farmers, artisans, and traders gathered to exchange products, negotiate prices, and socialize. Goods ranged from essential commodities like grain and pottery to luxury items such as jewelry and fine textiles. These markets were not merely transactional. They were social spaces where news, traditions, and stories were shared, reinforcing community bonds and connecting citizens to the wider empire. Craftsmanship was a vital economic activity. Potters shaped clay into vessels for storage, cooking, and ritual use, often decorating them with symbolic patterns. Metalworkers produced weapons, tools, and ornaments, their skill reflecting both practicality and artistic expression. Weavers created textiles for clothing, ceremonial use, and trade, employing techniques passed down through generations. These artisans contributed not only to daily life, but also to the empire's wealth and prestige. The Hittites also developed sophisticated systems for taxation and tribute. Vassal states and subject territories provided payments in grain, livestock, metals, or crafted goods. These contributions supported the central administration, funded military campaigns, and allowed the palace to maintain ceremonial functions. Taxes were recorded by scribes, often on clay tablets, ensuring accountability and continuity. The careful management of revenue enabled the Hittites to maintain infrastructure, support trade, and sustain their population even during times of conflict or scarcity. Irrigation and water management were crucial to agriculture and urban life. Channels, reservoirs, and cisterns were constructed to capture and distribute water efficiently. These systems allowed crops to flourish, livestock to drink, and cities to thrive even during dry periods. Maintenance required coordination and labor, often involving local communities in shared responsibility. Through these projects, the Hittites demonstrated their ability to harness natural resources for both survival and growth. Labor was structured and specialized. Farmers, herders, artisans, scribes, and soldiers all contributed to the functioning of the empire. Apprentices learned trades from skilled masters, ensuring knowledge transfer and continuity. Slaves, while present, often participated in household or agricultural labor, with rights protected under Hittite law. Society relied on cooperation, skill, and diligence to maintain stability and prosperity. Long-distance trade required logistical planning. Caravans needed routes that accounted for terrain, weather, and security. Supplies, water, and animals had to be prepared, and agreements with local authorities or vassal rulers ensured safe passage. Merchants, often accompanied by guards, traversed mountains, rivers, and deserts, connecting Hittite cities with distant lands. These journeys were not only economic but also cultural, carrying information, innovations, and artistic influences across regions. The Hittites also regulated standards for weights, measures, and quality of goods. This ensured fairness in trade and facilitated commerce across vast distances. Standardization allowed the empire to maintain trust between merchants, vassal states, and foreign partners, reinforcing both economic stability and political influence. Wealth accumulation in the Hittite world was closely linked to status and power. Palaces, temples, and administrative centers were stocked with surplus grain, precious metals, and luxury goods. Kings distributed wealth to maintain loyalty, reward service, and support religious observances. Citizens could also acquire property, goods, or status through trade, craft, or inheritance, creating a dynamic yet structured economic system. As night falls, imagine Hattusa's streets after a long day of trade and labor. Merchants close their stalls, craftsmen finish their work, and farmers return from the fields with the day's harvest. Homes glow with fires where families prepare meals, while small shrines are lit for offerings and prayers. In distant cities and villages, caravans pause for rest, exchanging goods and news before continuing their journeys. The empire hums with quiet activity, sustained by labor, commerce, and resourceful management. The Hittite economy was a web of agriculture, trade, craft, taxation, and administration. Its success rested on careful planning, innovation, and cooperation across society. Through these economic systems, the empire maintained stability, fed its population, and projected power across Anatolia and beyond. And as we let our minds wander among the fields, markets, and workshops of Hutti, we see a civilization that understood the vital connection between daily labor, resource management, and the enduring strength of an empire. Continue our journey through the Hittite world, We now turn our attention to the systems that allowed the empire to function, endure, and govern a diverse population. Law, governance, and administration. The Hittites understood that a strong state required not only armies and diplomacy but also structure, order, and consistent oversight. At the heart of the empire was the king, the supreme authority whose responsibilities extended across military, religious, and administrative domains. Kings were considered the earthly representatives of the gods, tasked with maintaining order, prosperity, and justice. They issued decrees, commanded armies, oversaw religious ceremonies, and managed relations with vassal states. The king's word carried immense weight, yet it was supported by an intricate bureaucracy that ensured its enforcement and continuity. The Hittite administrative system was sophisticated for its time. Provincial governors managed regions of the empire, overseeing taxation, resource allocation, and local justice. These governors reported to the central authority in Hattusa, maintaining communication through scribes, messengers, and official reports. This structure allowed the empire to administer vast territories while maintaining a degree of local autonomy. Governors often had military duties, ensuring that border regions were defended and internal stability maintained. Scribes formed the backbone of Hittite administration. Trained in the cuneiform script, they recorded everything from royal decrees and treaties to tax records and legal cases. Their work preserved not only the function of government, but also the cultural memory of the empire. Tablets were carefully stored in archives, often within temples or administrative buildings, ensuring that information could be referenced for legal, religious, or historical purposes. The precision and organization of these records were crucial for maintaining continuity across generations. Hittite law was detailed and complex, designed to regulate social, economic, and familial relations. Laws covered property rights, contracts, inheritance, marriage, divorce, and criminal offenses. Unlike harsher codes in neighboring cultures, Hittite law often emphasized restitution and compensation rather than purely punitive measures. Offenses were addressed through fines, restitution, or service, reflecting a pragmatic approach aimed at maintaining social harmony. Even slaves had defined rights, including protection of property, marriage, and the possibility of purchasing freedom. Legal cases were conducted under the oversight of officials who interpreted laws and ensured fair outcomes. Disputes could arise over land, inheritance, trade agreements, or personal injury, and the legal system provided structured resolution. Witnesses, documents, and even oaths taken before gods played roles in verifying claims. Law and religion were intertwined, reinforcing the authority of both the state and the divine in daily life. Religion was not separate from governance. The king participated in religious ceremonies to honor the gods, seeking divine sanction for decisions and policies. Temples served not only as spiritual centers but also as administrative hubs, with priests maintaining records, managing resources, and advising rulers. Religious observance reinforced social cohesion, reminding citizens that law, governance, and daily life were all under the watchful eye of higher powers. Military administration was closely connected to governance. Armies were raised from local populations, organized under appointed commanders, and supplied with weapons, food, and equipment. Military campaigns required coordination with governors, scribes, and merchants to ensure logistics, intelligence, and strategic planning. Victory in battle enhanced the king's authority, while military organization provided internal stability and deterrence against rebellion or invasion. Diplomacy was part of governance. Treaties, alliances, and negotiations were formalized by scribes and ratified through ceremonies involving the king and gods. Envoys carried messages, negotiated terms, and ensured adherence to agreements. Hittite governance thus extended beyond borders, blending domestic administration with international oversight, creating a state capable of both internal order and regional influence. Economic management was integral to administration. Taxes, tribute, and trade were regulated, recorded, and distributed to support both the central government and local needs. Storage facilities, granaries, and workshops were organized to supply food, tools, and military equipment. Markets and trade networks were monitored to ensure fairness and prosperity. Resource allocation required careful planning, especially in times of drought, famine, or military campaign, demonstrating the Hittites' understanding of practical governance. Communication was meticulously maintained. Couriers, messengers, and tablets ensured that instructions, laws, and reports reached every corner of the empire. This constant flow of information allowed rulers to respond to challenges, enforce law, and maintain cohesion. Records were archived, ensuring that the empire's decisions, achievements, and knowledge were preserved for posterity. As night falls over Hattusa, imagine the palace illuminated by flickering torches. Scribes carefully inscribe records on clay tablets, governors review reports from distant provinces, and officials prepare for the next day's duties. In the streets below, families rest, artisans finish their work, and temples glow with sacred fires. The machinery of government, though invisible to most citizens, ensures that life continues smoothly, that the laws are upheld, and that the empire endures. Hittite law and governance reveal a civilization deeply conscious of order, fairness, and stability. By combining military strength, religious observance, legal structure, and administrative precision, the Hittites maintained an empire that could withstand internal and external pressures. Their legacy reminds us that the endurance of a society relies not only on conquest and diplomacy, but also on the careful, often quiet work of administration, record-keeping, and rule of law. As we continue our journey into the Hittite world, let us now explore the intellectual life of this ancient civilization. While the Hittites are often remembered for their kings, armies, and diplomacy, they were also keen observers of the natural world. Knowledge, science, and careful record-keeping played crucial roles in agriculture, medicine, astronomy, and ritual, allowing the Hittite Empire to thrive across centuries. Astronomy and celestial observation were deeply connected to both religion and daily life. The Hittites monitored the sun, moon, and stars, understanding their cycles and predicting seasonal changes. Solar and lunar calendars guided agricultural planning, religious festivals, and administrative activities. Temples were sometimes aligned with celestial events, reinforcing the belief that the heavens were an integral part of earthly life. Priests and scribes recorded observations of eclipses, phases of the moon, and the movement of planets, demonstrating a meticulous attention to detail and a desire to harmonize human activities with cosmic rhythms. Mathematics, though practical rather than abstract, underpinned many aspects of Hittite life. Measurements were critical for construction, land division, taxation, and trade. Standardized units of weight, volume, and length ensured fairness in commerce and administration. Surveying techniques allowed the precise layout of fields, canals, and urban structures. Through careful calculation and measurement, the Hittites maintained order in both the physical and social landscapes. Medicine and healing combined practical observation with spiritual knowledge. Hittite physicians, often also priests, employed herbal remedies, poultices, and ritual incantations to treat illness. Illness was understood as both physical and spiritual, requiring attention to both body and soul. Clay tablets contain lists of remedies, procedures, and instructions for maintaining health. Some prescriptions included diet, hygiene, and environmental considerations, demonstrating a holistic approach that anticipated later medical traditions. The Hittites also excelled in engineering and construction. Cities were planned with roads, fortifications, water systems, and public buildings. Walls were thick and strategically designed, gates were reinforced, and towers provided visibility and defense. Temples and palaces incorporated aesthetic and symbolic elements, combining functionality with artistry. Roads and bridges facilitated trade and military movement, while reservoirs, cisterns, and irrigation systems ensured the survival of both people and livestock. Engineering was both a science and an art, reflecting the empire's sophistication and foresight. Writing and record-keeping were essential to knowledge management. The Hittites adopted cuneiform, creating a vast archive of treaties, laws, letters, religious texts, and economic records. Scribes were trained meticulously, ensuring accurate copying and preservation of knowledge. Tablets were stored in temple archives and palace libraries, forming a repository that documented centuries of governance, science, and culture. These records allowed the empire to function efficiently and provided a legacy that informs modern understanding of Hittite society. Observations of nature were integrated into agriculture and ritual. Farmers and priests watched rainfall, river levels, and seasonal shifts to optimize planting, harvesting, and storage. Omens in animal behavior, celestial events, or environmental changes guided decision-making. This careful attention to patterns reflected an empirical understanding of the environment, blending practical knowledge with spiritual interpretation. Education was another avenue for cultivating knowledge. Children destined for scribal, administrative, or religious roles underwent years of training. They learned cuneiform, mathematics, astronomy, and ritual practice. Apprenticeships in crafts, medicine, or military skills transmitted practical knowledge from generation to generation. Learning was both formal and informal, ensuring continuity and adaptability within society. The Hittites were also aware of metallurgy and early ironworking techniques. Bronze was widely used for weapons, tools, and ceremonial objects, but experiments with iron provided an edge in technology and warfare. Knowledge of smelting, alloying, and casting required precise understanding of materials, heat, and timing. These techniques demonstrate the Hittites' ability to combine observation, experimentation, and application, a form of practical science that enhanced both economy and military capability. Maps, though rudimentary, guided travel and administration. Knowledge of rivers, mountains, and trade routes allowed efficient movement of goods, armies, and messengers. Borders were monitored, and territories surveyed, ensuring that the empire's reach remained secure. Observation, measurement, and recording were central to the empire's capacity to manage its resources and maintain stability. Even religious and magical practices reflect a systematic approach to knowledge. Rituals, incantations, and offerings followed precise protocols, recorded carefully by priests. Observations of celestial and terrestrial phenomena were interpreted as messages from the divine, blending empirical observation with spiritual understanding. In this way, science, religion, and culture were intertwined, shaping every decision from agriculture to diplomacy. As night falls over Hattusa, imagine scribes working by torchlight, carefully copying astronomical observations onto clay tablets. Priests consult these records before performing rituals, while farmers plan the next day's labor according to the cycles of sun and moon. Scholars apprentice with elders, learning the delicate art of observation, calculation, and interpretation. Knowledge flows quietly yet powerfully, guiding the empire in subtle ways that ensure prosperity, stability, and alignment with both nature and the divine. Hittite science and knowledge were practical, spiritual, and deeply connected to daily life. Astronomy, mathematics, medicine, engineering, and record-keeping allowed the empire to thrive, blending observation with ritual, experimentation with tradition. And as we drift into sleep, imagine the quiet diligence of Hittite scholars, their careful eyes and hands preserving wisdom that, even millennia later, reaches us through tablets, ruins, and the echoes of a civilization attuned to the natural and spiritual worlds alike. As we move deeper into the Hittite world, we now explore the military aspect of their civilization. The Hittites were renowned for their skill in warfare, not only as warriors but as strategists, engineers, and organizers. Their military power allowed them to defend territories, expand influence, and negotiate from strength, making them one of the dominant forces of the Late Bronze Age. The Hittite army was structured and disciplined. Soldiers were drawn from free citizens, conscripts, and allied or vassal states. Infantry formed the backbone of the force, equipped with spears, shields, and bows, while chariot units provided speed, mobility, and shock power. The use of chariots was particularly significant. These vehicles, often manned by 2 or 3 warriors, could disrupt enemy formations, carry archers into battle, and serve as symbols of elite status and technological advantage. Training and preparation were central to military effectiveness. Young men learned not only physical skills but also tactics, discipline, and the handling of weapons. Chariot crews practiced maneuvers on open fields, coordinating movement, archery, and communication. Infantry units drilled in formation, learning how to respond to commands, maintain cohesion, and exploit terrain. Such training ensured that Hittite forces could operate efficiently across a variety of battlefields, from plains to mountainous regions. The Hittites were innovative in their use of technology. Bronze weapons were widely used, and ironworking, although limited, began to provide advantages in arms and armor. Siege techniques, fortifications, and defensive architecture were developed to protect cities and strategic locations. The construction of walls, gates, and towers at Hattusa and other cities demonstrates their understanding of defense as both an art and a science. Engineers played critical roles, designing obstacles, fortifications, and logistical solutions that enhanced both offensive and defensive capabilities. Logistics were a key component of Hittite warfare. Armies required food, water, equipment, and medical attention during campaigns. Supply chains were carefully planned, with depots established along routes and convoys transporting necessary resources. Messengers maintained communication between commanders and the central authority, ensuring coordination and strategic oversight. This attention to detail allowed the Hittite army to operate effectively over long distances and in challenging terrains. Military strategy extended beyond individual battles. Hittite commanders considered terrain, climate, enemy disposition, and timing when planning campaigns. Surprise attacks, ambushes, and coordinated movements were employed to maximize advantage. Intelligence gathering, often through scouts and spies, provided information about enemy strength, movements, and vulnerabilities. Understanding the broader strategic landscape was as important as the combat skills of individual soldiers. The Hittites engaged in both offensive and defensive campaigns. They expanded their territory through conquest, but also defended their borders against rival powers such as Egypt, Mitanni, and Assyria. Fortifications, garrisons, and patrols ensured the security of cities and trade routes. Even in times of peace, the military maintained readiness, demonstrating the interconnection between defense, governance, and diplomacy. Alliances played a significant role in military planning. The Hittites relied on vassal states and allied kingdoms to provide troops, resources, and strategic support. Coordination with these partners required diplomacy, negotiation, and trust, as well as careful management to avoid rebellion or conflict of interest. The integration of allied forces into campaigns expanded Hittite reach while reinforcing political bonds. Religion and warfare were intertwined. Soldiers often carried amulets, performed rituals, or invoked gods for protection and success. Priests accompanied armies in some campaigns, offering blessings, interpreting omens, and ensuring that divine favor was maintained. Victory was attributed not only to skill and strategy but also to the will of the gods, reinforcing the moral and spiritual dimensions of military life. Leadership in battle was crucial. Commanders needed both tactical skill and the ability to inspire and maintain discipline among troops. Kings sometimes led armies personally, demonstrating courage and reinforcing their authority. Decisions on when to attack, retreat, or negotiate required both experience and an understanding of broader political consequences. Leadership combined the practical with the symbolic, reflecting the dual role of the king as warrior and ruler. Communication and signaling on the battlefield were essential. Flags, drums, horns, and couriers allowed coordination over distances. Orders had to be clear and rapidly executed, as confusion could result in disaster. Training, discipline, and standardized procedures ensured that even complex maneuvers could be carried out efficiently under the stress of combat. After battles, the Hittites often incorporated conquered territories through negotiation, tribute, and administrative oversight. Defeat did not always mean destruction. Strategic incorporation allowed the empire to expand influence while minimizing resistance. The combination of military prowess, diplomacy, and administration created a durable and flexible approach to empire building. As night settles across the Anatolian plains, imagine the silent vigilance of Hittite garrisons. Soldiers rest behind fortified walls, chariots secured and weapons tended. Scouts move cautiously along borders, observing for any sign of danger. Messengers prepare for journeys to relay orders or news. The empire breathes with quiet readiness, sustained by organization, skill, and the ever-present awareness that strength is as much about preparation as confrontation. Hittite military strategies reveal a civilization that combined innovation, discipline, and foresight. Warfare was not only about brute force but about planning, logistics, intelligence, and coordination with religion, governance, and diplomacy. Through this intricate system, the Hittites maintained security, projected power, and preserved the stability that allowed their empire to endure across centuries. And as we drift into sleep, imagine the quiet rhythm of their preparation, the disciplined calm that underlies every great army, and the enduring presence of a civilization built on both intellect and courage. Reach the final chapter of our journey through the Hittite world. Let us reflect on their legacy, the reasons behind their decline, and the rediscovery of their civilization thousands of years later. The story of the Hittites is one of power, innovation, and resilience, but it is also a tale of change, loss, and eventual remembrance. The Hittite Empire reached its height during the 14th and 13th centuries BCE, controlling vast territories across Anatolia, northern Syria, and parts of the Levant. Its strength lay not only in military might, but also in sophisticated governance, diplomacy, resource management, and cultural achievements. The empire left behind cities, temples, fortifications, texts, and art that continue to intrigue historians and archaeologists today. However, like many great civilizations, the Hittites faced challenges that eventually led to decline. External pressures, including invasions by the mysterious Sea Peoples, conflicts with neighboring states, and disruptions in trade networks, strained the empire's stability. Internal factors, such as succession disputes, administrative overreach, and resource limitations, compounded these difficulties. Together, these pressures weakened central authority and made it increasingly difficult to maintain control over distant provinces. The fall of the Hittite Empire did not happen overnight. Cities were abandoned or repurposed, trade diminished, and political influence waned. Hattusa, once a bustling capital, was gradually deserted, its temples, palaces, and fortifications left to the elements. Yet even in decline, the cultural and technological achievements of the Hittites persisted. Knowledge of metallurgy, chariot warfare, law, and diplomacy influenced neighboring civilizations and left an imprint on the broader Late Bronze Age world. After the collapse, Hittite memory faded from contemporary records. Ancient Egyptians, Babylonians, and later Greek writers mentioned the Hittites sporadically, often mythologizing or misremembering them. Over centuries, the precise location and significance of their empire were forgotten, leaving behind ruins, scattered inscriptions, and faint echoes of a once powerful civilization. The rediscovery of the Hittites is a story of archaeology, linguistics, and persistence. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, explorers and scholars began excavating Anatolian sites, uncovering massive city walls, royal palaces, temples, and thousands of clay tablets inscribed in cuneiform. Scholars painstakingly deciphered the Hittite language, connecting these discoveries to historical references in Egyptian, Babylonian, and Assyrian texts. The Hittites emerged from obscurity, revealing a civilization more sophisticated, influential, and widespread than previously imagined. Hittite texts have provided insights into law, religion, diplomacy, trade, and daily life. Treaties, letters, and legal codes illuminate not only political and military affairs but also social structures, family life, and cultural practices. Religious rituals recorded on tablets reveal beliefs, gods, and ceremonies that shaped the spiritual and moral framework of the empire. Artistic achievements, including sculptures, reliefs, and pottery, testify to their creativity and technical skill. The legacy of the Hittites extends beyond archaeology and scholarship. Their approaches to diplomacy, law, and administration influenced neighboring states and contributed to the broader development of governance and statecraft in the ancient Near East. Innovations in chariot warfare, metallurgy, and urban planning had lasting effects on subsequent civilizations. Even linguistic contributions. The Hittite language is the oldest attested Indo-European tongue, offer vital clues to the origins and spread of human languages. Modern reconstructions of Hittite life rely on careful interpretation of archaeological and textual evidence. Scholars imagine city streets bustling with merchants, artisans crafting pottery, scribes recording transactions, priests performing rituals, and kings deliberating over treaties. The interplay of daily life, governance, religion, and military organization emerges as a complex yet coherent picture of a civilization that balanced practicality with creativity, authority with innovation, and human concerns with spiritual belief. Hittite art, architecture, and technology continue to inspire. The massive gates of Hattusa, adorned with lions and dragons, demonstrate both engineering skill and symbolic imagination. Temples and palaces reveal an aesthetic sensibility intertwined with function. Pottery, metalwork, and carved reliefs provide tangible connections to a world where craft, meaning, and utility converged. Through these artifacts, the Hittites speak across millennia, sharing glimpses of a culture rich in thought, labor, and expression. As night falls over the imagined plains and cities of Hattusa, envision the empire at its height, alive with activity, devotion, and governance. Hear the echoes of chariot wheels, the rhythm of markets, the murmur of scribes, and the quiet prayers of citizens. Now imagine the passage of time, the decline, abandonment, and eventual rediscovery. The ruins stand silent, yet the Hittites endure in memory, scholarship, and the artifacts that survive. The story of the Hittites reminds us of the impermanence of empires and the persistence of culture. Power may fade, cities may fall, and dynasties may vanish, but knowledge, art, and human achievement endure. Through careful preservation, study, and imagination, we reconnect with a civilization that once shaped the course of history. And as we drift into the quiet of sleep, let the memory of the Hittites linger, a civilization that mastered diplomacy, law, art, and warfare, leaving a legacy that continues to inform, inspire, and soothe our restless minds.